Summer is finally here, and the Ocean County Library has great events across the county just for teens. Enjoy live animals with the Jenkinson's Aquarium pointer penguins and the Eyes of the Wild live animal show. Learn the arts of knitting or embroidery with expert instructors. Join a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, or become a forensic detective with the Liberty Science Center. Your summer adventure begins at the library. Visit our calendar of events at theoceancountylibrary.org to find the events closest to you.
Hello, and welcome to Waves of YA, a podcast focused on young adult literacy, brought to you by the Ocean County Library's Teen Literacy Work Group.
Hello, my name is Summer, and I am the teen librarian at the Long Beach Island branch.
And I'm Chris. I am the branch manager for the Island Heights branch.
And today we are going to be talking about LGBTQ plus reads.
I think our first one is a solid, what trends are you currently seeing in queer fiction?
Do you want to take this first, Chris? Do you have some on your list?
I do. 2020 and 2019, it was all about isolationism, which was wild because like all these books that were coming out were written prior to the pandemic. And then like 2020, 2021 was all gays in space, as I was referring to it as. Like, I kept finding books and I was like, oh, this looks cool. Let me read some sci-fi. And I was like, oh, they're all alone on a spaceship and they're gay.
Did I miss the gays in space boat? I only know one gays in space, and it's Once in Future, which is like a King Arthur retelling.
Oh, there was City of Light. A bounty hunter falls in love with her Mark, and it's like, oh, yeah, I'm trying to kidnap you for like money, but I'm kind of crushing on you too. But priorities, I need money.
Oh my God.
So.
Which also falls into another amazing trope, which is assassin that's sent after you becomes part of your found family.
Yes. And then there was also The Darkness That Binds Us. It was two guys on a spaceship, and they were clearly supposed to be from Russia and America post-apocalypse. These are the only two countries left. We have to try and find a new place to colonize and like terraform.
Very like space race, 1960s space race.
We're trapped alone on the spaceship. Eventually we're going to get over our differences and get along together. And then there's like some mystery, creepy, like what's going on, and like a little bit time loop vibe to it at some points.
Ooh.
Because the days go by. It's one that's like I read enough creepy horror where I was like, I know the plot. I know where we're going.
Oh, is it like a what's it called? Bottleneck episodes of like where it's like you're stuck in one place. What's that called?
A little bit. Like they're definitely like they're stuck on a spaceship and it's like
like you can't go
time
anywhere.
Looping. Yeah, can't go anywhere. And then also like kind of time looping. We were like, what is happening? But if you read enough creepy weird things, you're like, I know what's happening. I can't wait how far down that rabbit hole we're going.
Oh no. The one I was mentioning, What's in Future, it's sort of a futuristic King Arthur retelling. It's set in space, and I call it like Swords in Space because you got that King Arthur vibes, but also you're in outer space, and Merlin gets reborn every so often when there's a new reincarnation of King Arthur, but like every one of them has died so far, and like no one has been able to complete the mission. Then there's this girl named Ari, I think, and she finds the sword Excalibur and wakes Merlin up, and there's a whole hullabaloo that goes on, and it's very gay. That one I had mixed feelings about because I liked it, but like there was just a thing with the pacing. You know how sometimes there's like a time jump?
Yeah.
It'll be like midway in the book, and then it'll be like 10 months later. And then it takes off from there. I didn't like the time jump aspect of it, but other than that, it was interesting.
Mentioning that, I feel like there's been a lot of recent queer retellings of stuff too, because there's also Gwen and Art Aren't in Love.
Yes, that's on my list too.
It's on my. I'm like, I have to read it. I had someone mention it to me at like Yalza, and I was like, oh, you have to read this if this is the stuff you like. And I'm like, I do. Yeah.
But from what
I will get to it.
From what I can gather with that one, they are not the OG King Arthur and Queen Guinevere. He's like a descendant of King Arthur, but it still takes place in the past. It's still historical fiction, but it's not Camelot. I don't know. Okay. But that one sounds really cool. I feel like I've been seeing a lot more paranormal and fantasy fiction, which I feel like was always a thing. I feel like the queer community has always been very much involved in the paranormal fiction genre.
You can do a lot more speculation with it.
Yeah. And also there's so much more room for, I feel like there's always the metaphor of being other in paranormal fiction that so
Yeah.
easily translates to, it's like the example that I'm going to give, which is the most obvious example, especially for you and I, is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and how
Of course.
we don't even get a canonically queer character until like the fourth season. However, so many of the fans of Buffy identify within that community, and there's just something about Buffy that draws people in. Like the episode where she has to tell her mom she's a vampire slayer, and everyone totally sees it as a coming out scene.
Yes. Yeah, it's such an easy parallel and like that feeling of otherness. And like that was why like I found the trend of prior to the COVID, everyone was already like, we're writing about feeling isolated. There was a lot of like post-apocalypse stuff that was coming out like 2020, 2021, where like, I know the timeline for publishing. This was written pre-pandemic.
Mhm.
And now it's doing numbers because everyone's like, I lived through being alone in my house with no one but my family.
I'm never going to read pandemic style fiction. I just cannot. It's too close to home for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen like a couple and I'm like, that were written like post-pandemic. And I was like, no. I'm like, I only read those because they were pre-pandemic and I was like fascinated because there was it's a bright yellow cover. Oh, All That's Left in the World, where the world ends and it's set on the East Coast, Pennsylvania, like in our area, close enough where I was like, oh, I know these
Ooh,
landmarks. Like, I know the tunnel into Maryland and stuff. I'm like, I've been on those roads. So it's like two guys trying to decide, like, can we trust each other? Do you have whatever disease it is that's turning people into zombies
of course,
and traveling
zombies.
together? Of course.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not a super big post-apocalyptic book fan, but I can be interested in zombies if they are compelling enough.
Yeah.
I'm not a pure thrill reader, which I feel like most zombie plots are like the high adrenaline fear thriller books.
Yeah. I like when it's post apocalyptic and like dystopian, where it's commentary or critiquing something about current
Mhm.
society and taking it to the extreme where I'm like, I don't have a lot of interest when it's like, oh, end of the world. I'm like, say something with it. Then I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm bought in. Like, what are you critiquing? What do you want us to change and think needs to be changed? And these are all like, it's really isolating being gay. And like, sometimes you feel like you're the only person. Except now, literally, you are the only person surviving an apocalypse. Good luck.
My, yeah, that is
You found
quite.
love, though. So, yay.
Oh no. Okay, so we got a lot of space books and a lot of paranormal
And
books.
then retellings. Like, I just read Prejudice in Pittsburgh.
Oh, that's so interesting because there's a new Pride and Prejudice retelling that just came out. It's called Most Ardently, and it's as if Elizabeth Bennet was actually a transgender guy living with that secret. So having to live that double life of being like Lizzie Bennet, but then also being, I forget the name that they also go by because I just read the summary, but it's also Pride and Prejudice, the storyline with Mr. Darcy. And I was like, oh my God. So it's interesting that you have another Pride and Prejudice retelling.
Yeah, that one's time travel shenanigans as well. So it's a modern day girl breaks up with her boyfriend and like the like neighborhood guy that comes into the corner store all the time sends her back in time
Of course.
to Pride and Prejudice era. So she doesn't meet anyone of the characters, but it's very much like, oh, like gotta follow social norms. And this girl's like, I just want to wear pants and listen to my like music on Spotify.
Yeah,
And then
you
like she
get,
finally figures out like, oh yeah, like my boyfriend was not great and very controlling and like was unhappy, making me unhappy. Also, like I kept being like, this is a problem I'll deal with later about liking girls. Now is later.
yeah,
Maybe get on that.
it's funny. And you read that one?
I did. I got it as an arc, so I was like, oh, it's published. I can talk about it now.
Oh, yay.
Yeah,
Okay,
so cute and so funny.
that's good. That sounds like a really low stakes book as
Oh,
well. Next question. Queer YA, then and now. What has changed and what has stayed the same?
yeah, I definitely like for now. It's like there is genres of YA. It's not like your genre is YA. It's like, oh, there's fantasy, there's historical fiction. Like we just talked about a bunch of things that didn't exist because it used to just be like, we're talking about, I think I might be queer. What do I do now? And like
Hmm.
dealing with now, it's like we've gotten those books, we've had them. Like, let's go, let's take a run for it. Let's have more diverse, interesting things going on than like just exploring being queer, queer in space, queer in
Yeah.
historical times.
Yeah, I do feel like, at least when I was a teenager, I feel like there definitely was queer fiction. I just don't think I was aware of it or I didn't know how to look for it. And I think you were right. A lot of it was the coming of age. I am in high school. I am dealing with this really stressful, confusing thing. And, all the teen emotions, which I don't know that's what I would have wanted to read anyway, because I was mostly reading about like wizards. So, and that's not to say there weren't books that had wizards in them that were gay when I was in high school, but I didn't know about them.
Yeah. The ones I remember from high school, and we established I'm a little bit older than you, is like that Rainbow Boys series,
I
Alex
don't know
Sanchez
any of
Rainbow
this.
Boys.
I don't know any of this.
I was definitely like given like books of like, we need the stats and we know that you're not going to get upset of like, hey, so it was like very much like, here, read this, give us some feedback, yes, no, like, do you like the book, can you write a review for it from a teenager? So
From like,
yeah,
you got handed these books from librarians when you were a kid.
it would just be stacks of like a mix of like, they're like, you read a lot and you're here, so like it would be like new fantasy that wasn't going circing, that like, why isn't it circing? We thought it would be a hit. Perks Being a Wallflower was one of the things I was given of like, here, read it.
Mm-hmm.
Tell your friends if you liked it.
Yeah, I feel like Perks of Being a Wallflower, I remember being like one of the first books I read that talked about those kind of issues.
Yeah, it was like, here, you're in the library all the time. Read the stuff that
They were,
is less popular and less common. So I was like, got it.
you were an untapped resource.
This is how I ended up as a librarian. I just kept getting handed books of like, read something different.
I was such a little stubborn kid that I would have been like, no, don't tell me what to do.
I was like, sure, I want something different anyway. So I ended up reading Luna when it first came out on my own of like, oh,
Luna.
like
I can like picture the cover in my head.
black cover, white script of Luna, and then a Luna moth on the cover. And it was the first ever YA depiction of a trans woman.
Oh,
And it
cool.
was told from the sister's perspective about her sister being trans.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the first, like it just recently celebrated its 15th anniversary. Maybe
Wow.
it's like from 2006, I want to say. Like it's really recent. So
Yeah,
I was
and
like, this is the first.
Yeah. And speaking of like then and now, when I was like, this is back when I was a preteen/teen, like middle school, I wasn't aware of the transgender community at all. And I don't think I knew of any book that mentioned it. Honestly, and don't laugh at me, the first I was introduced to that concept by watching Degrassi.
Okay.
And that's what got me like, oh, that's a thing. And then later I met people who were transgender and I learned more about it, obviously from the actual source and not from television. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't think I knew of any books that broach that topic.
Yeah, I can't remember. It was like a reality show that was like on VH1, but it had been on something else too, that had one of the Arquette siblings that was trans. That was like my introduction, was like reality TV. So like that's never a good depiction of anything of
course,
reality
yeah.
TV.
But I do think
So
there's
like
there's so many more books about the transgender experience now, which is great. Another
Yeah.
one that is, I'm going to say so many times today, like it's on my list to read, but I haven't read it because my list is enormous. But it's Hell Follows With Us.
It's so good.
Okay, so you can speak for it. That's good.
Yes, it is so good. And like that's another, like I said, Luna was just it's my sibling, like talking about their sibling and watching their sibling. So it's like one step removed, less in touch with the feelings. The whole focus of the book is their sister's transition and like watching their sister like go through all this. Whereas Hell Follows With Us, it's dystopian, post-apocalyptic,
Body
ties
horror.
in body horror. Like it has so many levels, and then on top of it, it's a critique of the church and religion, where they're like, "Oh, yeah, we're going to turn you into a literal monster."
Yeah, because I know it's
so
about like this kid he grew up in an apocalypse cult, and then he decides I'm gonna get out of here and goes on the
Yeah.
run. So it's an on the lam road trip
Yeah.
adventure as well, and he's going through some kind of paranormal metamorphosis, right? There's some kind of transformation going on. I do feel like body horror is something that is also explored a lot in queer literature.
Yeah, and it makes sense, especially when you're like, I don't fit in my body. Like my body is wrong. Like you have those feelings, seeing it presented in such a like blunt, like it's not just you and it's not just on the inside.
Yeah,
seeing what you
so
feel inside on the outside as well.
It's a really good vehicle for expressing those feelings.
We talked about some like sad stuff. I like sad books. We established this. What are some books that exemplify some queer joy?
Okay, let me think. I feel like Rainbow Rowell Carry On series.
Yes.
You get the paranormal, or I guess it's more like fantasy than paranormal vibes. They're at like a wizard school. It's very Harry Potter adjacent, but there's a lot of there's like a cute little queer romance. I've only read the first one. I didn't read the whole trilogy, but it was very low stakes.
Yeah.
They're just having a zany, magical adventure and figuring out their feelings, which I enjoy. Like, I feel like I'm the opposite side of the spectrum from you with sad books. Like, I don't like a sad book. I like a very light book about people having a little adventure.
I really like F.T. Lukens for fun, happy stuff. They have Into the Deep. It's like the Little Mermaid pirate, fish out of
Oh, yeah.
water. And it's so cute and so fun. And I think I read that in a day. And I was just like, this is so happy. And their stuff is always fun and happy of like, oh, we're going to take this genre and parody it and make fun of some of the tropes. And everyone's queer. Let's go.
Yeah, because as
Fun
much as
adventures, low stakes.
yeah,
Their one is about after you've saved the world or completed your quest, what now? Like, okay, now you're the king. You're
what now?
wildly unqualified.
Oh my gosh.
And you're just like, I just want to date my bestie.
Yeah,
Except now I'm the king and I'm dealing with all these problems and I don't know how to deal with any of them.
that seems very much like Legends and Lattes, which isn't technically a teen book, but I've read it and it totally can be read. It totally can subvert age.
True.
It's a good transitional book in the sense that it can be read by teens or adults. This lady, she's an orc. She did all her adventuring and now she just wants to open a coffee shop. But no one knows what coffee is. And there's like a cute tiefling who becomes her barista or whatever. I forget what actually happens, but it's just super
so
light
good.
and super low stakes.
I love that book so much where I made my D&D character based off of her combined with Ebony Darkness Dimensional Ravenway.
Oh my God. Don't even. No one's going to know who Ebony Darkness Dimension Ravenway is.
I know, but the people that will be also
Okay.
embarrassed for both of us.
Good.
But yeah, that's such a cute, fun one as well for Legends and Lattes.
I think that's also a reason why fantasy is a genre that we're seeing so much queer fiction in, is because in a fantasy world, if you're the writer, you can choose to take away all of the prejudice and milestones people have had to go through and just make it something that is not just accepted, but sort of boring, sort of like, yeah, we got people of all sorts of different sexualities and it's not something worth discussing because it's just there. It's just part of life.
Yes. Realistic fiction, just cute fluffiness. Heartstopper, which just
yes,
had
of
volume 5
course.
come out. Even when it's like a sad thing, it's just the drawing style is so cute and happy where you're like, oh, we're like a little sad right now, but look how cute the pictures are. We're just gonna keep
Aw.
like it'll get better. Like at no point is it like, this is the worst. You're just like, it'll get better. And
Yeah, we can't not
that's
mention
super popular.
Heartstopper.
Oh, I know.
And I
That's
feel
such a cute, super happy one.
So I feel like as much as it is important to have the books that look at the darker side of stuff and get into the raw feelings that you have to go through in a lot of cases, I think it's just as important to have stuff where the main plot isn't overcoming prejudice and adversity, and the main plot is like, oh, I have to defeat an evil snake monster, but also like this girl.
Yeah.
It's a side thing, sort of. Have you seen The Owl House? It's a wonderful fantasy cartoon, but there's a lot of queer representation just kind of sprinkled in. And not just in the way where it's like, oh, look, those two girls are holding hands. The main character actually does start dating another girl, but that's like, again, the side plot. The main plot is the magical stuff that's going on, but it's very much just ubiquitous throughout the world that this is normalized and no one really thinks anything of it.
Yeah, having that as like a bounce, and also like the goal of like we just want it normalized, not to be a big deal. Like we're doing our thing.
Well, I think we already talked about this. What will always be a YA queer classic for you? And I think you already talked about Luna.
It's adult, but Alexis Hall, who did Boyfriend Material, they also did A Lady for a Duke, which is just like so cute and happy. It's historical romance, and like the protagonist is trans and historical times, and like that. I'm like, this is like, it's so good. Like it's adult,
Definitely.
but it's not like too racy. It's like, oh, mostly we're like Pride and Prejudice-y, like we can't show ankles Also, no one can know that I faked my own death.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's so dramatic. I love historical romances because they're often just so dramatic and over the top, which I love. And I'm definitely marking that down because for me, at least, something that I struggle with as far as reading queer fiction is that the ones that I'm seeing turn out to be contemporary, realistic. And I'm talking about, let me backstep because we just talked about how a lot of queer fiction is paranormal. I'm talking about straight up romance novels, like queer romance novels. A lot of them tend to be realistic fiction, which is fine, but not what I like to read. So I'm always
Yeah.
looking for queer
Something
romance
different.
novels that are either historical or paranormal.
Alexis Hall genre hops like it's nobody's business of like, we're doing
Amazing.
this week. And I'm like, yes, do a
Yes,
retelling of A Midsummer Night's Dream.
amazing. I also think that the author of Gwen and Art Are Not in Love has another historical fiction that's queer, but I'm not totally sure what the name is. Let me look it up because I'm
Uh,
gonna.
there's it's a retelling of Great Gatsby that's also queer that I like.
What's it called, Nick?
It was not called Nick, so there's more than one, which isn't surprising
Well, because
because
people have been writing scholarly articles about Nick and the Great Gatsby for years. Oh, it's
yeah.
called Reputation. Lex Croucher, who wrote Gwen and Art Are Not in Love, also has a book called Reputation, which I think follows a group of girls and their coming out in society. I don't know if I know like a classic that
I
at
know
least
it's
not one that I read when I was younger.
Music from Another World. Oh no, I think it's gonna be a classic. It's gonna be sad. It's set in the 90s or 80s, late 80s, early 90s. So people die.
Music from Another World.
Music from Another World, which I do love, but I don't think that one's gonna be a classic. That one's very much like fun historical timepiece. Baby and Solo, which is also
Yeah,
fun.
it's hard because I feel like a lot of queer fiction, I mean, obviously there is a lot that is from far back in the past, but I feel like a lot of it is popped up in the 90s. One that I think is going to be in the future is Song of Achilles
Ooh, yes, that's
by
definitely gonna be
Madeline
a
Miller.
classic
That
in the
definitely
future.
will become a classic, which if no one knows, Song of Achilles, which is a retelling of the War of Troy from the Iliad, which was very popular, came out in 2011. What the heck?
Oh, really? That
Why is it that old?
yeah.
I mean,
The
that's
one
like
I
13 years old, to be
yeah,
fair. That's a
yeah,
teenager.
yeah, that is crazy. I thought it was much more recent, but I have been hearing about it for a while. I was thinking Like a Love Story by Abdi Nazman,
Mhm.
which is set in the 90s, and I feel like that one got read like it came out super hot, possibly because all of us felt personally attacked that we're like, I was alive for this book.
Aw.
Book setting. But it's a girl, she like is crushing on this guy that who's definitely in the closet, trying to like start dating him. He dates her gay best friend as well. And then like they kind of are like trying to navigate through relationships, and like her gay uncle is part of the ACT UP movement and has AIDS, so it's dealing with the AIDS crisis as well as the teen love triangle of this isn't going to end well for anybody because one of you's in the closet lying about like trying to like pass and be like nobody knows except like the two guys are like into each other as well, so I'm like it's going to be heartbreak. I was like this will probably stick around because it does deal with historical topics, especially stuff that like, isn't getting covered in school as much. So
Mhm.
2019, so pre-pandemic.
Yeah, another that I definitely think of as a classic. It's not technically a teen book, but again, I think it could be read by anyone. It came out in 1985. It's called Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. It's by Jeanette Winterson and it's semi-autobiographical. She has a straight up memoir about the same thing, but this is like her slightly fictionalized version about her life where she grew up with this very religious mother in England. And it's about her relationship with her, but also a relationship she starts with a young girl in her town, and how she wasn't really even aware that what she was doing was, in air quotes, wrong because no one ever really had the conversation with her about it. It was always spoken of in sort of hushed terms. So she starts hanging out with this girl and she's like, nothing's wrong with this. This is fine. And then obviously things don't turn out so well. And Jeanette Winterson just has a really beautiful, almost magical realism style of writing that I really enjoy. And a lot of her books have these themes in them as well.
Summer is finally here, and the Ocean County Library has great events across the county just for teens. Enjoy live animals with the Jenkinson's Aquarium pointer penguins and the Eyes of the Wild live animal show. Learn the arts of knitting or embroidery with expert instructors. Join a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, or become a forensic detective with the Liberty Science Center. Your summer adventure begins at the library. Visit our calendar of events at theoceancountylibrary.org to find the events closest to you.
Not a fiction classic, but All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I think it's going to end up being a classic. It's only from 2020, so it's a recent one, but it's nonfiction. I know it's gotten banned, which is a really good way to be like, oh, why is it banned?
Which, speaking of banned, do you know the book that has had the most bannings last year?
No,
is
I know.
Genderqueer. It's a graphic novel, I think.
Yes, I read it. I think that one's another one that's going to end up being a classic. Both of these have gotten so much attention. They're both nonfiction. Genderqueer is a graphic novel, which is always super popular and a quick read, which also increases how many people read it because it's like, oh, it's a fast read. But it deals with tough topics. It deals with the reality of things. Same with All Boys Aren't Blue. It deals with being Black, being queer, living in poverty, and being the gay cousin and having to deal with standing out and deal with tough topics, but also going through surviving, thriving as you get older, and getting through all these things.
Yeah.
A little bit graphic in parts where they're like, oh, it's more graphic than I expected for their age rating that I gave it. They were like, it's 12. And I was like, you should probably bump this up to high school.
Yeah, maybe 13, 14.
Yeah,
but I mean, that's at anyone's discretion. I feel like, I know people who read Flowers in the Attic when they were 10, and I was like, girl, you okay?
I was reading Anne Rice.
Yeah, my cousin was allowed to watch Grey's Anatomy when she was a kid, and I was like, are you kidding me? You're reading Anne Rice, you said? Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, yeah, I was reading Anne Rice in 6th or 7th grade, so I'm like, and The Hobbit, but I'm like, yeah, it's whatever your parents allow.
I feel like it's impossible to avoid stuff that may or may not be age inappropriate, and at the end of the day, what does that even mean? It's a very arbitrary term, and I feel like it's better to experience stuff like that in fiction than from the internet.
Yeah, or in a controlled environment than guess what? This is the first time you're dealing with it as it's happening. Good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
Then you don't have any skills or tools to handle it. So what do I do? Also wildly unprepared for any of this happening.
I'm just thinking about other queer classics, and if anyone listening wants to read old, back further than the 90s classics, I'm going to shoot them off real quick. Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, Maurice by E.M. Forster, Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall. I need to add.
I'm thinking Carson McCullers, and I cannot remember any
of them. A Heart is a Lonely Hunter.
Yes, thank you. I was I wrote a whole paper about this and read a ton of her books for my sophomore project in high school. And I was like, yep. It was wild because I was back then the stuff was rumored or alleged or believed to. They kept dancing around is she a lesbian? Is she not? It was very weird. And I was in high school. I'm side-eyeing all of this. And I'm why are we doing this?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
I read the book.
Oh, you meant in the scholarly articles you were reading?
The scholarly articles was dancing around it. It was very weird. I was like,
it's just say it.
Yeah, I was like, huh. And my mom flat out was just no, yeah, you're right.
Even so many books that aren't even, it's not blatantly obvious. It's still, you can read it in context. There's so many people who wrote about Great Gatsby, even though there's no latent queer context, there's a lot of between the lines stuff.
Yes, and Little Women with Joe.
Even Dracula. Or the fact that also Carmilla.
Yes.
Which is a vampire book that predates Dracula. I'm fairly certain, I'd have to fact check this because I've heard this, but I don't know if it's true. I'm pretty sure it was written as a cautionary tale towards lesbianism, but now in the modern day, everyone's like, heck yeah, Carmilla, lesbian vampire, go off. So I think it's pretty cool how they just kind of flipped that around.
Yeah.
What's our next question?
Favorite new queer releases and authors to keep an eye on?
Ooh, this book itself is not a new release, but the author just came out with a new book. The new one is called Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. I just read her previous book called House of Hollow, and I read it in 2 days. I was obsessed. It's not that long. but still, whenever I wasn't doing something I had to do, I was like, I'm going to be reading this book. It's about these three sisters from England. When they were children, they were vacationing in Scotland and they just disappear off the street one day and their parents can't find them. They're missing for like a month, but then they show back up on that street a month later and they can't remember anything that happened. And they sort of start acting strange after it. Their eyes turn from blue to black, their hair turns from black to white, and they just have this weird aura around them. And people start becoming obsessed with this unsolved case. It's like BuzzFeed Unsolved, like no one knows what happened. And so everyone's obsessed with them and they have stalkers and they're really famous, but it sort of breaks apart their family. And you find out exactly how that happens. But then it jumps to the future where the youngest one, 10 years later, she was 7 when this happened, and now she's 17. Her older two sisters have left home and they're each kind of doing their own thing. And she's trying to get through high school. And then these weird things start happening again. This weird man wearing a mask starts following her, and her older sister goes missing. And so she and the middle sister go on this sort of mystery hunt to look for her. But while they're doing it, they're figuring out clues about what happened to them when they were kids. It's a queer novel in the sense that a lot of the characters are queer. The main plot is this mystery. It's definitely fantasy and horror combined. There's body horror involved, but many of the characters are queer. And again, it's what I said before. The main plot isn't about that exploration because they're already aware of who they are. They're already aware of it. It's sort of just sprinkled throughout. But it was so good. And it was very twisty and turny. And even though I kind of could guess what happened, but even when it did end up being what I kind of guessed, I was still really surprised at how it happened. So I'm obsessed with House of Hollow.
That sounds awesome. I really like Maggie Takuta Hall's stuff. She wrote The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea, and there's a sequel, and it is currently sitting on my shelf of shame of things to read that I have not, like, so I was like, it came out, I need it, and then I was like, I have been so busy.
The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea.
Yeah, and then there's a sequel now, so I'm super excited about that.
And didn't she also write that graphic novel?
She
What's it
did.
called?
Squad?
Yes, which is about the cheerleaders who are
Werewolf
also
cheerleaders.
werewolves.
Yes. So her stuff's super fun. It's got some darker tones to it, but generally it's dark, but like happy ending, which is what I like about YA stuff. Aiden Thomas always has really great books that I really enjoy of like, oh, he wrote Cemetery Boys. The retelling of Peter Pan wasn't that great, but then it was like very much like sophomore slump of like, all right, you like had to write a second book, but then his Sunbearer series is much better.
I feel like that's also worth mentioning. We're talking about all these LGBTQ books that we really like, but it's also okay if you read one you don't like. That's the great thing about there being so much of it now is that some of it you might not like, and that's fine. It doesn't mean you don't support what it's trying to say. For example, another book that I would recommend it to people. It was good. It's Lost Girls, which is a YA, it's called the Vampire Revenge love story. And I really liked it for how they describe how the vampires were created. The vampire lore in the book was really interesting and unique, but the love story in it kind of fell flat for me. It just felt kind of rushed, and I didn't fully believe that by the end of the book they were willing to like run away together. I was like, you haven't known each other that long, and I just, from the girl's perspective, from her POV, I was like, I don't understand. Tell me why you like her. Tell me why you're falling so hard for her. Let me feel it. But I was sort of just like meh about the love story.
Oh, that's
But
disappointing because that's on my list of TBR.
but
But that's also
but
my feelings about Lost Boys anyway. I was like, eh.
yeah, no,
Which
but
is
I
why it's
still
been like not read for so long.
but I still would totally recommend it just because the story of the main character and her journey being turned into a vampire and then getting revenge on the person who turned her into a vampire, and the lore of what being a vampire means in the book is very interesting. Like it's still very good. I would still recommend it.
So there for the plot, not for the romance.
Yeah, again, it was just sort of like It was like, but it was also a side thing. You can't do everything. Sometimes you're trying to do too much and it falls flat. But it was still a good book, and I would totally recommend it to people.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the ones that like not super into. Like the main one, because I just saw it when I was scrolling through my Goodreads, is like Bruised, which I hate.
Really?
I hate it so much. It's about roller derby, and I'm just so
Oh
angry
my
about that
God,
book.
two things you love.
I know. I was like, I hate it because I don't like how it depicts roller derby. It's not an accurate depiction to how roller derby functions.
Mhm.
It might have been accurate like 15 years ago when like roller derby was like, let's go party and like not take it seriously. And now we're like, it's a serious sport. Please take us seriously. Please
Mhm.
consider us for the Olympics again. I know we didn't make it for 2020 or 2024, but
That's
please.
really cool. I would totally
Yeah.
watch the Olympics if there was roller derby.
There's two different rule sets, which is the problem. So like, I don't like that, and the romance in that one wasn't believable either. Our protagonist was, I'm straight, I'm straight, I'm straight, I'm straight. I'm making out with a girl. I'm straight, and I'm like, there was no like breadcrumbs
I feel like that's
of
also
like,
very 90s of them. We were just talking about Buffy, and I love Buffy, and I think they did a lot for the queer community with their show, but they also just totally made Willow go from straight to gay and didn't even bring up the fact that she was probably bisexual.
and that was Joss Whedon was like, oh, I wasn't sure if I wanted to have Xander or Willow be queer, so he did more breadcrumbs for Xander. Where I was like, why didn't you like
That
you
would have
did
made a
more
lot of
setup?
sense.
That would have made sense. So the girl the protagonist and Bruce makes out with, like, is very much like she is clearly into her. Yeah, I believe that. It was like you're reading it and then like it got hit by a bus, and I was like, what just happened?
Oh
Like,
no, not
I'm
a
like, what?
bus.
Yeah, I was like, very Mean Girls moment. I was like, what is happening in this scene right now? Because like the entire rest, like nothing in this book had any breadcrumbs of even like, okay, the protagonist isn't picking up the things that she's saying or doing or how she's acting. Of like, oh, maybe she's just not aware. Like, no, like it was like, oh, we just took a hard left with no
Oh, I
warning.
see. Yeah, from 0 to 50.
There was no like, oh, she's like really cute or anything. It was like, I'm straight, I'm straight, I'm straight, I'm straight. I'm making out with her. And I'm like, I feel like there probably should have been like, I think she's pretty somewhere in here between these
And
things
that,
of like, I'm straight, but she's like really pretty.
yeah, or like, oh, what's
Something.
this? Maybe I'm having some panic. I do. That's another trope I love. I love gay panic because it's often just very humorous.
Yes.
Because they're like, oh no, what's happening?
It's always funny. Or occasionally when it's just like, oh, I was the last person to figure out what was happening.
Yeah, all my friends were
Why
like,
didn't you tell me?
yeah. That actually feeds into my next question, which is what are some important factors for you in a queer book and what makes for good representation?
I feel like it has to at least be somewhat believable.
Hmm.
I don't like toxic relationships and things. Like I don't like like a blanket statement for like any romancy thing. I'm like, if we are falling in love, I want to fall in love.
Yeah,
Like,
not just be like, wow, red flags, red flags.
yeah, and I'm like, so that's why like a lot of romance novels like annoy me. Where I'm like, no, why? Like I hate it.
Hmm.
So I'm always like, I want you to like each other. So like, even if it's like enemies to lovers stuff, cool. Like there's a mutual respect of like we are each other's mortal enemy, and I respect each other for that. And then it grows into something lovely. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to feel authentic
Hmm.
and not third party ish of like, oh, I heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend. It doesn't need to be a queer author, but it has to feel real. Like, and with Luna, where it was from the sister's perspective, yeah, that was 2006.
Hmm.
We're almost 20 years past that.
Yeah,
We can
we
just
should.
have it feel authentic and like
Yeah,
be told from that perspective.
and I feel like it can also go to the other extreme of when I feel like sometimes it can be trying too hard to make
Yeah.
it good representation, and it almost feels like, okay, you can decorate something in a million rainbow flags and buckets of glitter, but that doesn't mean it's good representation. It has to feel, like you said, authentic. It has to
Yeah.
be real and not just a parody of
Yeah.
what a queer relationship is. It's just a relationship. It's different, obviously, in certain ways, but like it's at the end of the day, it's just a relationship, and it's going to have a lot of the same hallmarks of a heterosexual romance novel.
It's going to have like different things of like family interactions and perceptions are going to
Hmm.
be different. But like even with hetero relationships, it's like, oh, my like significant other's mom doesn't like me, or like there's always weird family things in every relationship. So like have
Hmm.
the weird family things in these, especially like sibling stuff. Like part of having a sibling, like I don't have any, but part of it is roasting your sibling.
Yeah, you got to
Of
roast your
like,
sibling.
yeah, if they have siblings, have the sibling make fun of them. Like
Yeah.
that's what siblings do.
Yeah, it's sort of like how if you ever like read a book and the sibling will call them big bro or little
Oh yeah.
sis or something, and I'm like, never in my life was I ever called big sis.
I was hung out with people that had big families because I'm like, what is it like? Tell me what it's like to have siblings. So I'm like, the only time that you got called big brother, big sister, or anything like that was you are about to get brutally roasted and like made fun of. Like, it is sarcastic. It is not meant to be endearing.
Yeah. So whenever that's like a, yeah, whenever I hear that, I'm just like, do you have siblings? Author of this book?
I was like, you too are an only child. I know.
Yes.
Not being a one note character is the other thing.
Not falling into stereotypes like cardboard cutouts.
Yeah. Sometimes you want easy, fluffy, like not a lot of depth, but I still want some depth to things. But have like two things going of like, but yeah, like having like depth of like, okay, well, there's this and this, like two things going for people. And like, that's kind of true for everything of
Yeah.
world building of like, okay, they're warriors, but they're also cats. Now, how does that interplay? Yes.
I also feel like if you read Warrior Cats, you're gay now. Sorry.
I haven't read them, but yeah, it seems to be like the
Yeah, I
trend.
saw this meme and it was like a person wearing the Percy Jackson Camp Half-Blood shirt, and it was like, wow, I really love your gay pride t-shirt.
Were you really into Greek mythology?
Yeah,
Let me give you Percy Jackson and let's just follow that path.
exactly. Our last written question, but we can add more if we want, is what is your personal favorite subgenre within queer fiction?
Oh, ooh, it's a toss-up between historical fiction and fantasy. But that's because I like love me some historical fiction anyway. Of like, if I am going to read a romance novel, I'm like, I wanted historical fiction and like just drenched in the like ties of society of like, we can't be improper. I have
Yeah,
shown you my wrists. Anything where it's the tiniest thing is possibly a scandal. I'm like, I love it so
yeah. That
much.
because it's just like again, it just raises the not the like stakes, but like it raises the humor level, I feel like.
Yeah, there's a few authors that are doing a lot of like queer historical fiction right now, which is always great. Where I'm like, give that to me, like the Pride and Prejudice in Pittsburgh, where like the girl from that time period is like, you can't run around in pants. This is undignified. You're in your underwear. And the other girl's like, let me tell you about 2023. It's amazing. You can wear pants.
Yeah.
Just like that dynamic, even if that dynamic's not there, but one person doing like something slightly not absolutely by the books is like, oh no, I'm scandalized but intrigued.
That is funny. I really like, I think, yeah, fantasy and paranormal, but I could just be, because I just read House of Hollow, my brain is all in, I want it to be scary and mysterious mode. So maybe next week I'll have a different answer. But right now it's all paranormal mystery.
Definitely love the paranormal, the fantasy. Like you can kind of do anything. Also, like I've always loved vampires.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah, like how can you not? You're like, oh, let's add this to this. Two great tastes
Yeah.
great together. But like
That
right
is
now,
true.
I'm reading Gone with the Wind, so I'm like deep into like historical fiction at the moment. Of
Gone with
like,
the Wind is long.
oh my god, it's 1,000 pages. I've been reading it forever.
Yeah, at some point I'm
Like
going
2
to start
weeks.
Dune, and I feel like that's another big one.
I'm deep into historical fiction, so I'm like, give me all the romance for historical fiction. It is sitting on my shelf, and it has Tupac in the name. I can't remember what the full title is, but it's set in the 90s. Historical fiction, obviously, about being the only lesbian and then also the only girl that's Indian in her area and dealing with that as well. So it's like, oh, so many things that are going to be disapproved of by either the mainstream society of where she's living and also like her family with their strict, this is like what you're expected to act like and who you're supposed to be. And she's like, I love Tupac.
That is funny. You never watch movies from like the 90s or early 2000s and you're just like, if this was made today, this would have been
Yes.
gayer.
Oh, yeah.
Bend It Like Beckham. There's a whole, have you ever seen
Oh
that?
my god, yes. That's why I grabbed the book.
There's a whole little subplot where the mom of her friend thinks that her daughter and this other girl are dating and she's freaking out about it. She's trying to be supportive but freaking out about it. And it turned out that wasn't the case at all. She just made an assumption. But if
Yes.
this was made in 2024, they would be dating.
Oh, absolutely.
Same thing with Faith and Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yes. Absolutely. I was like, if you're watching, I was like, pretty sure Faith is by Pan.
Oh,
Like,
definitely. There's so much subtext, but also I'm sort of like, do we want to add another tragic love story to Buffy's history? Does she need that?
yeah.
I feel like it definitely would have gone down in flames just because of their personalities. Another series I want to recommend, which is technically fits, but I'm not sure just because, well, it's a 4-book series and the two characters only get together in the last book, but there is a very slow burn thing happening throughout them, which is the Raven Boys. I love the Raven Boys. It's like amazing found family friendship book that has paranormal stuff in it. And it's so hard to explain what the plot is, but there is a queer relationship that is a very slow burn and culminates in the last book. But I wanted to recommend that one as well because I love it so much.
I feel like I started to read the first one and did not finish, which is wild because I like Maggie Stiefvater. She's a great author. The book I'm thinking of is Rana June and the One and Only Now by Sida Etat. She's Iranian, and her like best friend passes away, and that was the one where she's into Tupac. So still like very tight, strict culture. It's been sitting on my shelf of shame, but I was like, yes, this seems great.
How tall is your shelf of shame?
Well, it can't be taller than me. So.
Oh, okay. You're pretty short though, so
Yeah,
you're a petite lady.
It's 4 feet high. It's fine.
Okay.
So like set in the 90s, she's into Tupac and like has a crush on a girl. So like there's that one. Another historical fiction one. But it was like historical fiction will probably end happy if it's YA.
Oh yeah, definitely. Also, I feel like the thing is, if it's a if it falls into the like the romance category, it's gonna have a happily ever after because that's a staple of the genre.
Yeah.
It's hard because I'm such a stickler for genre classifications because there's romance that has fantasy or historical or other elements in it, and then there's fantasy or historical fiction that has romantic elements but isn't necessarily a romance. And sometimes
Yes.
it's easy to get them confused.
Yeah, no, that's very much like
Yeah,
what is the priority in your storytelling?
yeah,
Kind
especially
of
with
like where it weighs.
especially with TikTok and even like I was at Barnes and Noble and they had a table labeled speculative fiction and some of the stuff on it was like straight up fantasy and I was like, do you know what that means? Do you know
Yeah.
what speculative fiction is?
And I
So
think part of
it's
it's
so
like
easy to sorry.
librarians where we're like very much like we have very strict definitions for things. TikTok, it's an ordinary person that like
That's true.
this is my book, so like their job is not book.
My job is
Like,
just book.
just book. I'm a little more forgiving of like, okay, that's not where I would classify it, but my job is literally doing this and I read an insane amount of books every year. So
I mean, I would never call them out for it. It's just what I think in my head. I'm just like, no, that's not it.
yeah, meanwhile, I'm like, I would definitely classify this as a different age range and just say it. I'm like,
Yeah. But then again, I'd rather you explore something
yeah.
that is questionable in a book than on the internet.
Yeah, and also
Who
I'm
knows
like,
what you're
I'm
gonna
not your parent. As a librarian, what book do you want? Go read it, enjoy it. It's your parents' job to decide whether or not it's for you.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm never gonna tell you no, you can't have a book.
Do you have any last minute recommendations you'd like to give?
Ooh, because I didn't talk about any manga. I'm currently reading Catch These Hands, which is Catch These Hands by Murata. It's a 4-volume series. We have all of them. 2 delinquent girls that were rivals in high school that used to fight all the time grow up and then run into each other again. And the one is kind of an awkward weirdo of, I need to earn your respect. And she's like, yeah, I like had a crush on you forever. So I'm challenging you to a fight
Oh,
right
good.
now as 2 grown adult women. And if I win, you're going on a date with me. And the
That's
other girls are like, well,
amazing.
what? Yeah. And she's like, well, what do I win? And she's like, I'll challenge you again. And I'm like, so the winning is you get to have more fights.
Of course.
Turns out the one girl had been throwing fights the whole time just to be like, yeah. So she just wins the fight, 1-hit KO basically, and then it's like, let's go on a date. And the other girl's trying to like be very like, oh, all my friends are getting married and having kids, and like I would get married and have kids. So she's like, I have to like ditch this girl. So we're gonna take her on the worst date ever, and we're gonna take her fishing. And keeps trying to do like the worst date ever. And the other girl's like, it's fine, I'm having fun.
Aw.
So like, I'm like,
I do
oh.
love a childhood rivals to lovers pipeline. That is actually very cute.
The whole thing is like very cute because they're both trying to be like, I'm a grown up and pretend to be like I have to change who I am as an adult, but you're still who you are as an adult.
The secret is that you never feel like a grown up.
And like the one that's like, I want to get married and have kids is like very much like, I just want to hang out with my friends who are all married and have kids, and we'll hang out with each other because like not having kids play dates. It's not like, oh, I want either of these things. I just want to hang out with my friends again. So I'm like, reevaluate your values, girl.
There's another WLW manga that I have not read, but I've heard of. It's called You know how like manga has like the longest titles? It's called She Loves to Cook, She Loves to Eat. They're both single ladies, and one of them loves cooking, but she always makes way too much food because she's just cooking for herself. And then I think she has like a neighbor in the same apartment complex who is this tall, muscular lady who loves to eat. And so she ends up sharing meals with her a lot because of this coincidence. And I guess they end up dating. I don't know more than that. Speaking of the trends, I do feel like we're getting more and more in manga as well.
Yeah, and they're not like wrapped in plastic.
Oh yeah, if you're wrapped in plastic, then we can't officially recommend those.
Yeah, no, but there's
But
like
I
so many
mean,
that aren't wrapped in plastic, which is great. I'm like, oh,
sometimes
like,
I
it's just
will.
a fun story.
Sometimes I will be browsing the manga at Barnes and Noble, and I'll like flip through it, and I'll realize that it should have been wrapped in plastic, but wasn't. And I'm like,
Oh,
please
yeah.
let no one be standing behind me. This was an
Oh,
accident.
yeah. I was like, oh, I see someone decided to read this in the store and took the plastic off.
I could
Yeah.
never fathom that. I'm like such a rule follower. I would be like, that's illegal. You can't do that.
Oh, I'm like, if I'm going to pay, well, I'm like, I'm a librarian. You shouldn't have to pay for books anyway. Like, come borrow them for freezies.
That's true.
And also, if I'm going to buy it, I want to flip through it and see if I like it.
Also, if you do want to read the plastic wrapped manga from the library, it's on Hoopla. Pro tip.
Yes. Is it Suichi and something? Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it is, but there's Minimano. Maybe that's what I'm just thinking. Yeah, there's like a couple different MLM ones, which is not the like multi-level marketing.
No, yeah. Whenever I say MLM, I'm like, this is not a pyramid scheme. This is
Yes.
men who love men.
Yeah, but that is also my first thought. And it's like the initials of the characters are S and M, and I'm like, it's not Suichi Minamano. That is Kurama from Yu Yu Hakusho, and it's like one of them are similar enough where I'm like, that is all my brain can tell me.
I'm also just thinking that someone should write a MLM, men who love men, romance that has to do with an MLM, multi-level marketing scheme. Maybe it's two detectives. They have to go undercover to take down a multi-level marketing scheme, but they fall in love.
I would read that in a heartbeat.
So I just think it's so funny. MLM means both those things.
No, like very different vibes. Like that's my current one that I'm like, it's so fun.
Yeah, that does sound fun.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Also, I like the art style on it too, which I'm like, oh,
that's good.
Perfect. Like characters look different.
That is good. Want to wrap it up?
Yep, that is.
All right. Thank you for listening to Waves of YA LGBTQ Reads. Signing off. This is Summer.
And this is Chris.
See you next time.
Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to check out the Ocean County Library's website for more podcasts and events. All titles mentioned in today's episode can be found through the Ocean County Library, free with your library card. Until next time, happy reading.
Summer is finally here, and the Ocean County Library has great events across the county just for teens. Enjoy live animals with the Jenkinson's Aquarium pointer penguins and the Eyes of the Wild live animal show. Learn the arts of knitting or embroidery with expert instructors. Join a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, or become a forensic detective with the Liberty Science Center. Your summer adventure begins at the library. Visit our calendar of events at theoceancountylibrary.org to find the events closest to you.